My name is Amelia, and I've worked at Morrison & Associates for 6 years. If you asked me 3 months ago what I'd be doing today, I never would have said testifying before the State Labor Board about systematic workplace harassment. But here we are. It all started with Richard Brennan. Rick, as he insisted everyone call him, became our department manager 4 years ago. The guy was a walking HR nightmare wrapped in expensive suits and fake charm. Within his first month, the whispers started. Sarah from accounting mentioned he stood too close during performance reviews. Jessica from marketing said he made comments about her assets during team meetings. Maria from reception complained about his accidental touches when she handed him files. I learned early to stay invisible around Rick. I took the stairs when I saw him waiting for the elevator. I ate lunch at my desk instead of the break room. I scheduled my bathroom breaks around his calendar. Call it survival instinct, call it cowardice, I don't care. I watched him circle other women like a shark, and I refused to be next. The thing about predators is they get bolder when nobody stops them. Rick's behavior escalated from inappropriate comments to accidental touches to outright propositions. He had a system: target new hires, single mothers who needed the job, anyone he perceived as vulnerable. He'd pile on extra work, create impossible deadlines, then offer to help in exchange for dinner dates or weekend business trips. Most women quit within 6 months. Those who stayed learned to navigate around him like I did. We developed an unofficial buddy system: never go to the supply closet alone, always have a witness for meetings with Rick, warn new hires without being too obvious about it. HR was useless. Pamela Harrison, our HR director, was Rick's golf buddy. Every complaint disappeared into a filing cabinet. Every concerned employee was told they were misinterpreting friendly behavior or creating a hostile work environment themselves. The company protected Rick because he brought in clients and revenue. Numbers mattered more than people. But Rick made one critical mistake. He got comfortable. He stopped being careful. And when he finally crossed the line with the wrong person, I was ready. I just didn't know it would be me. What happened when Rick finally targeted Amelia directly? The answer would change everything. It happened on a Tuesday morning in March. I was refilling my coffee when Rick cornered me in the break room. No witnesses, early enough that most people weren't in yet. He'd been watching my patterns, timing his move. "Amelia," he said, blocking the doorway. "We need to talk about your performance." My blood turned to ice. I'd never had a performance issue. Never missed a deadline, never had a client complaint. I knew this was his opening move. "I'm concerned about your commitment to the team," he continued, stepping closer. "You seem distant, unfriendly. That's not the Morrison culture." I mumbled something about being focused on work. He smiled that predatory smile I'd seen him use on so many others. "I think you need some mentoring. One-on-one coaching. I'm free this Saturday, we could grab dinner, discuss your career development." The coffee mug shook in my hands. This was it. My turn in the crosshairs. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm busy this weekend." His smile vanished. "Amelia, I'm trying to help you here. Your attitude is becoming a problem. I'd hate to see it affect your next performance review." The threat was clear. Play along or face consequences. I'd watched this exact scenario play out with other women. Some gave in to keep their jobs. Others fought back and got fired for performance issues. Either way, Rick won. But I wasn't like the others. I'd been preparing for this moment for 4 years, even if I didn't realize it. "Let me think about it," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Don't think too long," he replied. "Opportunities like this don't come often." That afternoon, I stopped by Best Buy and bought a digital voice recorder. Small enough to hide in my jacket pocket, sensitive enough to pick up conversations across a room. I also downloaded a recording app on my phone. If Rick wanted to play games, I'd make sure I had the rulebook. I spent the next week researching workplace harassment laws, documentation requirements, and legal precedents. I created a secure email account and started backing up everything to a cloud storage service Rick couldn't access. I even consulted with an employment attorney, just a free consultation, but enough to understand my rights. The second confrontation came the following Monday. Rick called me into his office for a check-in. This time, I was ready. "Have you thought about my offer?" he asked, closing the door behind me. I have, I said, hitting record on the device in my pocket. I'm not interested in mixing business with pleasure. That's unfortunate, he said, leaning back in his chair. I was hoping we could work something out. Your performance metrics are concerning. What specifically concerns you? He pulled out a file, my file. Late projects, missed deadlines, customer complaints. Every word was a lie. I'd never missed a deadline in my life. But I let him talk, let him dig his own grave with false accusations and veiled threats. I'm confused, I said. I don't have any late projects or customer complaints. Could you show me the specific examples? He fumbled through the papers, making up details on the spot. Every lie was recorded. Every threat was preserved. When he finally propositioned me directly, suggesting I could improve my standing by being more cooperative, I had it all on tape. I'll need to review this feedback with HR, I said, standing to leave. Amelia, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I don't think you understand how things work here. I'd be very careful about involving HR. They tend to side with management. As I walked back to my desk, I realized something had changed. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. And Rick had just made the biggest mistake of his career. But gathering evidence on Rick was just the beginning. What I discovered next would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the company. The recording from Rick's office was just the start. Once I began paying attention, really paying attention, I saw the patterns everywhere. Rick wasn't operating alone. He was part of a system. I started documenting everything. Every inappropriate comment I overheard, every time I saw him corner a female employee, every instance of retaliation against women who'd rejected his advances. I kept detailed logs with dates, times, witnesses, and outcomes. My apartment became a command center with printed emails, recorded conversations, and carefully organized evidence files. The breakthrough came when I befriended Sandra, the night cleaning lady. She'd been working at Morrison for 15 years, invisible to management, privy to conversations people thought no one else heard. Sandra had stories that would make your skin crawl. Mr. Rick, he's not the only one, she told me one evening as we sat in the empty break room. Mr. Harrison in accounting, Mr. Phillips from legal, they all the same. They protect each other. She told me about finding torn clothing in Rick's office trash, about overhearing phone calls where he bragged about his conquests to other managers, about the corporate credit card receipts for hotel rooms and expensive dinners with female employees who'd mysteriously quit soon after. Why haven't you said anything? I asked. Sandra laughed bitterly. Who gonna believe the cleaning lady? Besides, I got grandchildren to feed. These men, they can make people disappear. But Sandra became my eyes and ears. She had access to every office, every trash can, every private conversation after hours. In exchange for a promise that I'd protect her identity, she began collecting evidence I could never access myself. The most damning discovery came from Rick's computer. Sandra found printed emails in his trash, correspondence with other department heads about problematic female employees. They had a system, identify troublemakers, manufacture performance issues, document false complaints, then force them out through harassment or termination. It was bigger than just Rick. It was institutional. I traced the pattern back years. Dozens of women had been pushed out of the company through this system. Women who'd filed complaints, who'd rejected advances, who'd tried to report harassment. The company had been systematically purging anyone who might expose their boys' club. The paper trail was extensive. Performance reviews that contradicted employee records. Sudden policy changes that disproportionately affected women. Promotion decisions that defied logic. They'd been running a sophisticated operation to maintain their power structure. But they made one crucial mistake: they documented everything. In their arrogance, they believed they were untouchable. They kept records of their schemes, thinking it would protect them legally. Instead, it became their downfall. I spent weeks copying documents, cross-referencing dates, and building a comprehensive case. I had recordings of Rick's threats, emails detailing the conspiracy, witness statements from other employees, and financial records showing company money being used to facilitate harassment. The evidence was overwhelming. But I knew I couldn't take it to internal HR. They were part of the problem. I needed external leverage. That's when I contacted the State Labor Board, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and 3 different employment attorneys. I also reached out to former employees who'd been forced out, building a coalition of women ready to speak out. The response was immediate and electric. Lawyers who'd been waiting for a case like this suddenly had ammunition. Government agencies that had been monitoring the company for years finally had concrete evidence. Former employees who'd been silenced by fear and shame found their voices again. But as word began to spread through certain circles, I realized I'd painted a target on my back. Rick and his associates were about to discover that their perfect system had been compromised. The war was about to begin, and I was about to learn just how far these men would go to protect their empire. It started subtly. My access card mysteriously stopped working for the executive floor. My computer passwords were accidentally reset. Meeting invitations disappeared from my calendar. Small things, easily explained away as technical glitches. But I knew better. They were testing their defenses, probing for weaknesses in my resolve. The first direct attack came during the monthly department meeting. Rick stood at the head of the conference table, his usual smug smile replaced by something darker. "I want to address some concerns about information security," he began, his eyes finding mine across the room. "It's come to my attention that confidential company information may have been compromised. We'll be conducting a full audit of all employee activities." My heart hammered, but I kept my expression neutral. Around the table, other women shifted uncomfortably. They could feel the tension, even if they didn't understand its source. "Anyone found to be accessing files outside their authorization level or sharing proprietary information with unauthorized parties will face immediate termination," Rick continued. "We take corporate espionage very seriously." Corporate espionage. The bastard was laying groundwork to frame me as a security threat. After the meeting, I found a formal reprimand in my employee file. Allegations of unprofessional conduct and failure to maintain confidentiality standards. All lies, but documented lies that could be used to justify my termination. That afternoon, my computer was remotely accessed. I watched files disappear from my desktop, watched my browser history being altered. They were planting evidence while erasing my legitimate work. When I tried to call IT, I was told my help desk privileges had been suspended pending investigation. The psychological warfare intensified. My office supplies vanished overnight. Client files I needed for presentations disappeared. Colleagues who'd been friendly suddenly avoided me in hallways. Word was spreading that I was under investigation for unspecified misconduct. But their biggest mistake was underestimating my preparation. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered was stored in multiple locations they couldn't access. Every document they deleted from my work computer had been backed up to personal accounts. Every conversation they thought was private had been recorded and preserved. I'd learned from watching their previous victims. They relied on isolation, fear, and financial pressure to break their targets. But I'd built my own support network, secured my own resources, and prepared for exactly this scenario. The final escalation came on a Friday afternoon. Rick called me into his office with 2 men I didn't recognize, corporate security, based on their cheap suits and predatory stances. "Amelia," Rick said, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. "We need to discuss some serious concerns about your conduct." The taller security guard stepped forward. "You're being placed on administrative leave pending investigation into allegations of theft, harassment, and breach of confidentiality." "Theft," I repeated, genuinely surprised by the boldness of the lie. "Company property has gone missing from your workspace," Rick said, producing a tablet I'd never seen before. "This was found in your desk drawer during a routine security sweep." Planted evidence. They were framing me for theft to justify termination and discredit any accusations I might make. "I've never seen that device before," I said calmly. "That's not what our investigation shows," the second guard replied. "We'll need your key card, company laptop, and access credentials immediately." As they escorted me to my desk to collect my personal items, I saw the fear in my colleagues' eyes. This was the message: cross us, and this happens to you too. But as I cleaned out my desk drawers, I smiled. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd silenced me like they'd silenced so many others. They had no idea what was coming next. Walking out of Morrison & Associates that day, I wasn't defeated. I was finally free to bring down their entire house of cards. The moment I walked out of Morrison & Associates, I went straight to my car and made 3 phone calls. First to my employment attorney, then to the State Labor Board investigator, and finally to the journalist who'd been waiting for this story to break. They just made this a criminal matter, my attorney said when I described the planted evidence. Fabricating theft charges to retaliate against a harassment complainant? That's not just wrongful termination, that's conspiracy and fraud. Within hours, I was sitting in a federal building, recounting my story to investigators who'd been building their own case against Morrison & Associates. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been gathering evidence. The company had been under scrutiny for years, but investigators needed someone on the inside willing to come forward. "We've been waiting for someone like you," Agent Martinez told me. "Someone with documentation, recordings, and the courage to testify." The next morning, I woke up to find my story on the front page of the city's business journal. The headline read, "Tech Company Under Federal Investigation for Systematic Harassment." The article included quotes from 6 former employees, all women who'd been driven out through Rick's system. My evidence had given them the courage to speak publicly. By noon, my phone was ringing non-stop. Reporters, lawyers, other women who'd worked at Morrison and wanted to share their stories. The floodgates had opened. But the real bombshell came that afternoon. Agent Martinez called with news that changed everything. "We executed search warrants at Morrison this morning," she said. "What we found is bigger than we imagined." The FBI had seized computers, files, and financial records. They discovered evidence of not just harassment, but insurance fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. Rick and his associates hadn't just been abusing employees, they'd been stealing from the company to fund their activities. The planted tablet they'd used to frame me? It contained corporate financial data that had been illegally accessed. Rick had been selling client information to competitors, using company credit cards for personal expenses, and falsifying employee records to cover up his tracks. "He's not just a sexual predator," Martinez explained. "He's a criminal who used harassment as a tool to silence anyone who might expose his financial crimes." The investigation expanded rapidly. Federal agents interviewed dozens of current and former employees. They subpoenaed bank records, client files, and communication logs. They discovered a network of corrupt executives who'd been using their positions to enrich themselves while destroying anyone who got in their way. Within a week, Rick was arrested at his home on federal charges of conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. The pub walk footage made national news. The man who'd terrorized so many women, who'd seemed untouchable in his expensive suits, was handcuffed and led away in an orange jumpsuit. But Rick wasn't the only one going down. The investigation revealed that CEO Morrison himself had been aware of the harassment complaints and had actively participated in covering them up. CFO Phillips had been embezzling funds through fake vendor contracts. HR Director Harrison had been destroying evidence and intimidating witnesses. The entire executive leadership of Morrison & Associates was implicated in what prosecutors called a criminal enterprise masquerading as a legitimate business. As I watched the news coverage from my apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: vindication. Not just for me, but for every woman who'd been driven out, silenced, or broken by these men. The phone rang. It was Sarah from accounting, one of Rick's earliest victims who'd left the company 3 years ago. "Amelia," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I saw the news. I can't believe you did it. You actually brought them down." "We brought them down," I corrected. "All of us who refused to stay silent." But even as I celebrated this victory, I knew the real test was still coming. The trials would be public, brutal, and the defense would try to destroy my credibility and character. The legal battle was just beginning, and Rick's lawyers were about to unleash everything they had to discredit me. The courtroom was packed on the first day of testimony. Media filled the back rows, sketch artists positioned themselves for the best angles, and family members of both victims and defendants sat in rigid silence. I'd never seen so many eyes focused on one person as I walked to the witness stand. Rick's legal team was everything I'd expected: expensive suits, cold smiles, and a reputation for destroying witnesses. Lead attorney Patricia Vance had built her career defending executives accused of sexual harassment. She was known for her scorched earth tactics and her ability to paint victims as vindictive liars. "Ms. Thompson," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "you've painted quite a picture of my client. Tell me, how long have you harbored these feelings of resentment toward successful men? I'd prepared for this. My own attorney had warned me that they'd try to make me the villain, to suggest I was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge for imagined slights. I don't resent successful men, I replied calmly. I resent criminal behavior, regardless of who commits it. Criminal behavior? Vance repeated, raising her eyebrows theatrically. Isn't it true that you secretly recorded private conversations without consent? That you accessed confidential files without authorization? That you conspired with other employees to damage my client's reputation? Each question was designed to make me look like the real predator. But I'd learned something important over the past few months. Truth has a weight that lies can't match. I documented illegal harassment and retaliation, I said. I gathered evidence of crimes being committed against me and my colleagues. I exercised my legal right to protect myself and others. The real turning point came when Vance tried to discredit my recordings. She claimed they were taken out of context, that Rick's words were being misinterpreted, that his behavior was simply old-school management style. That's when Prosecutor James Chun played the audio from Rick's office. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Rick's voice filled the room, making explicit threats and propositions. There was no misinterpretation possible. No context that could explain away his words. Your performance metrics are concerning, Rick's voice said through the speakers. I think you need some mentoring. One-on-one coaching. I'm free this Saturday, we could grab dinner, discuss your career development. Then my voice, I'm not interested in mixing business with pleasure. That's unfortunate. I was hoping we could work something out. Your performance metrics are concerning. The jury's faces told the story. Several women looked disgusted. The men appeared uncomfortable. Even the judge seemed affected by the blatant quid pro quo harassment. But Vance wasn't finished. She brought up my years of avoiding Rick, suggesting it proved I was paranoid and unstable. You admit you went to extraordinary lengths to avoid normal workplace interactions with Mr. Brennan, she said. Doesn't that suggest an irrational fear? An inability to function in a professional environment? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The chance to explain not just my actions, but the actions of every woman who'd ever tried to survive in a hostile workplace. I avoided Rick Brennan because I watched him destroy other women, I said, looking directly at the jury. I saw Sarah from accounting quit after he cornered her in the supply closet. I saw Jessica from marketing get fired for performance issues after she rejected his advances. I saw Maria from reception transfer to another department after he made her job unbearable. I turned to face Rick directly. He was smaller than I remembered, diminished by his circumstances. I didn't avoid him because I was paranoid, I continued. I avoided him because I was smart. Because I understood that predators like him count on women being too polite, too afraid, or too isolated to fight back. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people shifting in their seats. Even Vance seemed momentarily thrown. But you didn't just avoid him, she pressed. You actively worked to destroy his career. I worked to stop him from destroying other women's careers, I corrected. I worked to expose criminal behavior. I worked to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Over the next 3 days, other witnesses took the stand. Sandra testified about what she'd seen and heard during her years of cleaning offices. Former employees shared their stories of harassment and retaliation. FBI agents presented evidence of the financial crimes that had been uncovered. The pattern was overwhelming. Rick and his associates had created a system of abuse that went far beyond sexual harassment. They'd used their positions to enrich themselves while destroying anyone who threatened their power. During closing arguments, Chun laid out the case with surgical precision. This wasn't just about one man's inappropriate behavior, he told the jury. This was about a criminal conspiracy that used harassment as a tool of control. The defendants didn't just abuse their employees, they stole from their company and defrauded their clients. Vance's closing was desperate, filled with character assassination and victim blaming. But the evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. As the foreman stood to read the verdict, I held my breath. 4 years of fear, months of investigation, and weeks of testimony had led to this moment. We the jury find the defendant, Richard Brennan, guilty on all counts. The words echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Rick's face went white. His wife, who'd stood by him throughout the trial, buried her face in her hands. Behind me, I heard Sarah from accounting let out a sob of relief. Count by count, the foreman read the verdict. Conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. Racketeering, guilty. Sexual harassment, guilty. Retaliation, guilty. Embezzlement, guilty. The list went on, each guilty verdict another nail in the coffin of Rick's empire. The other defendants weren't spared. CEO Morrison, guilty on fraud and conspiracy charges. CFO Phillips, guilty on embezzlement and money laundering. HR Director Harrison, guilty on conspiracy and witness intimidation. The entire leadership structure of Morrison and Associates had been brought down. Judge Patricia Hoffman didn't mince words during sentencing. "Mr. Brennan," she said, looking down at Rick with undisguised disgust, "you used your position of power to prey on vulnerable employees. You created a hostile work environment that destroyed careers and lives. You stole from your company and defrauded your clients. You represent everything that's wrong with unchecked corporate power." She sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 8. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years. Morrison and Associates was ordered to pay $15 million in restitution to victims and fined an additional $25 million. But the real victory wasn't the prison sentences or the financial penalties. It was the change that followed. The story made national headlines. #Morrison scandal trended on social media for weeks. Business schools added the case to their ethics curricula. Other companies, terrified of facing similar exposure, began implementing real oversight and accountability measures. I testified before Congress about workplace harassment and corporate accountability. My story became part of a broader conversation about power, abuse, and the courage it takes to speak truth to authority. The settlement for Morrison and Associates was substantial, enough to secure my financial future and fund advocacy work for other harassment victims. But more importantly, it sent a message that survivors wouldn't be silenced, that evidence of abuse would be preserved and prosecuted, and that justice was possible. 6 months after the trial, I started a non-profit organization called Document and Expose. We help workplace harassment victims gather evidence, connect with resources, and build cases against their abusers. We've assisted over 200 women in the past year, leading to dozens of successful prosecutions and settlements. Sandra, the cleaning lady who'd helped me gather evidence, became our first employee. She'd been afraid to testify publicly, but her behind-the-scenes work had been crucial to the case. Now she helps other invisible workers, janitors, security guards, food service staff, document the abuse they witness. Sarah from accounting joined our board of directors. Jessica from marketing became our head of communications. Maria from reception leads our support group program. We'd all survived Rick's system, and now we were helping others survive theirs. The office building where Morrison and Associates used to operate sits empty now. Sometimes I drive by and remember the fear I used to feel walking through those doors. It seems impossible that I was ever that scared, that small, that powerless. But I wasn't powerless. None of us were. We just didn't know it yet. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from a woman named Jennifer in Seattle. She'd read about our organization and wanted help documenting harassment at her tech company. Her story was familiar: predatory manager, complicit HR, intimidated colleagues. But she had something her abuser didn't expect: the knowledge that she wasn't alone, that evidence could be gathered, that justice was possible. "I read your story," she wrote, "and I realized I don't have to live in fear anymore. I can fight back. I can win." That's when I knew we'd accomplished something bigger than just bringing down Rick Brennan. We'd changed the conversation. We'd shifted the power dynamic. We'd proven that predators can be stopped, that corruption can be exposed, and that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one who brings down the entire system. Rick Brennan is in federal prison, serving his sentence in a facility 3 states away. He'll be eligible for parole in 2032, when he's 67 years old. His career is over, his reputation destroyed, his legacy one of criminality and abuse. But my story isn't ending. It's just beginning. Every woman who finds the courage to speak up, every piece of evidence that gets preserved, every predator who gets exposed, that's the real victory. That's how we change the world. Not by staying silent, not by staying invisible, but by gathering evidence, building coalitions, and refusing to let anyone make us disappear. The hunters have become the hunted. And we're just getting started.